So you heard the applause there. We see that the capsule has landed off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida. Sonny Williams, Butch Wilmore of NASA, NASA's Nick Hague as well, and Russia's Alexander Gorbanov touching down. For Sonny and Butch, it ends a marathon, 9 months in space, finally home. Their stay on the International Space Station was only supposed to last 8 days. Their mission dramatically extended after the spacecraft that they arrived on suffered technical problems. The pair travelled back to Earth in a SpaceX capsule along with 2 other astronauts. And for them, the readjustment to gravity, to life back on Earth. Well, let's bring in our science correspondent, Thomas Moore. Speeds they were travelling at the very beginning of this as they began to re-enter Earth's atmosphere, 17,500 miles an hour. What was the speed when they landed, Thomas?
Oh, it was just a couple of miles an hour by the time of splashdown. It is extraordinary how that capsule, which you can see is looking pretty blackened as it's been smacked into the atmosphere at such high speeds, creating this ball of plasma. 1,600 degrees Celsius it's withstood, and it's looking a little bit charred. But the astronauts are safe, bobbing around on the waves off the coast of Tallahassee. That is the Freedom capsule. That is its name, and it has brought the stranded astronauts home.
Thomas, stay there. It is 10 o'clock. You are watching Sky News at 10 as we bring you the live pictures then from just off the coast of Florida. 2 astronauts stuck in space for more than 9 months have splashed down, as you can see, completing their 17-hour journey back to Earth. Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams blasted off to the International Space Station on June the 5th last year. Meant to be up there for just 8 days, but a series of delays meant their stay extended to 286 days. So Thomas is here with me, as you say, looking a little bit charred, enormous temperatures, the heat shield protecting them as they re-enter Earth's atmosphere with all the friction that it then gives. And obviously their weight gains for them physically as they get closer to Earth.
And although they do an awful lot of exercise while they're on the International Space Station, there are special zero-gravity treadmills that they run on. They do weights and that kind of stuff, trying to maintain the muscle and the bone strength that they would need back on Earth. And that's very much a big programme of what they do. And there you can see the boats rushing in to pluck out the astronauts. It's not a pleasant place to be. It's actually fairly calm, but still that capsule has been bobbing about inside. Not a great place to be if you're even a teeny bit seasick. They will be glad to get out. They have been living in effect, an artificial atmosphere for the last 9 months. The air heavily filtered, and by all accounts, it's pretty smelly up there. So to take in that first breath of fresh air back on Earth is something that they all look forward to. So this is going to be a big moment for them, for sure.
To pull those out. The recovery vessel there closest to the spacecraft is going to be performing some safety checks. We can see there they're using an instrument that is basically working to detect if there are any hypergolic vapors or fumes that are still residing in and or around the Draco thruster nozzles or outlets. The hypergolic fuel, which is necessary for on-orbit burns to maneuver the spacecraft. Unfortunately, those hypergolics are unable to be breathed. They are toxic, and so this team here is doing those initial safety checks to make sure that it is safe for the rest of the recovery team to approach the spacecraft. They're also checking to make sure that any residuals from the pyros are safe and are not going to cause any issues. We can see the team working their way around the spacecraft to do these, basically these sniff tests on all of those Draco thrusters.
And as we continue to await the recovery of our Dragon spacecraft with NASA astronauts Nick Hague, Sonny Williams, Butch Wilmore, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov inside, Dragon has autonomously completed several steps to safe itself following splashdown. We are continuing to see Dragon in what is known as stable 1 configuration. That's kind of the ideal configuration following splashdown. It's upright, and the Dragon capsule is in the right configuration for it to be hoisted into the recovery vessel Megan, which you do see a little ways off in your screen approaching. Dragon will continue to remain live on air with you through that recovery process, all the way through the point where the crew is extracted from the Dragon.
So question then, Thomas, after so long in space, can they crawl out of there? Can they walk at all? How do they get themselves onto the boat?
Well, they will be quite weak. They will have to be helped out. So they will lift the capsule. You saw in the background the mothership. They'll hoist the capsule on board. That would be the safest way, rather than risking them clambering into one of those inflatable boats in the middle of the ocean. So they'll probably lift the capsule on board, and then there's a much safer deck exit for these astronauts who have spent 9 months in space. They'll be a little bit wobbly, not least because of the last 46 minutes of descent will have shaken anybody up.
Yes, a textbook re-entry and splashdown, and yet this is a story which has pitted 2 American private companies against each other, and in fact 2 presidents against each other.
Very much. We're witnessing another success for SpaceX. They were both, SpaceX and Boeing were awarded contracts by NASA to devise a way of shuttling crew up to the space station. But whereas, we're now on the 10th commercial crew transfer with SpaceX, Boeing is still on the starting blocks, and it is a big problem for Boeing. They've invested billions of dollars in this program. It's long overdue. It's way behind when it should have been operational, and there have been rumours that it might actually give up and concentrating on its aeronautical division, which in itself has had problems. So this has been a tough few years for Boeing, for sure.
The suggestion is it's 25 minutes till they're lifted onto the into the mothership there, so they're bobbing about for quite a while. Looks like they're attaching the line there to be able to tow it to the ship in the distance, where you can see the crane which will haul the capsule back on. And as you say, a much safer disembarking for those 2 astronauts who will have been living without gravity. What will they have done? How did they pass their time? Because Sunny, we know, became a record breaker.
She did. She took part in 2 spacewalks while she was up there. So she has spent the greatest number of minutes of any female astronaut outside the capsule. So that is something that she will treasure, for sure. She describes this as her happy place. But alongside those moments where they've been able to gaze down at the blue marble of Earth, they have been busy doing science, an awful lot of experiments. The Butch and Sunny were very quickly assimilated into the crew. This was not the place for a holiday. They've been kept extremely busy, but they have enjoyed it too. This is not somewhere that they were desperate to leave, although at the same time they had that mixed feeling that they were missing their family and friends after such an unexpectedly long time in space.
Yes, and we're looking forward to a long awaited reunion with their family, certainly. Mr. Wilmore, now 62, missed most of his younger daughter's senior year of high school, his older daughter in college. Ms. Williams, 59 years old, had to settle for internet calls from space to her mother, who was obviously concerned about her daughter. But I think she took command, didn't she, of the International Space Station? So she's, had a successful time in space, record-breaking, taking command. And what an extraordinary experience then for these 2, 8 days to 9 months. Yes,
I mean, any astronaut wants to be in space. That's what they are trained for. And to get another go, an extended stay like this, is something that they will treasure. When you speak to astronauts, they are itching to go back as quickly as possible. And 8 days would have been an extremely brief time. They got 9 months. There was 4,500 orbits they did. That's a lot of chance to look down at weather patterns and the geography of the planet, as nobody else really gets to see it.
And America set its... There we go. We can see the camera's moving around quite a lot, but there's the mothership, as you called it, in full view there, waiting to haul the capsule on board. And certainly America has set its stall by allowing private companies to transport astronauts to and from the space station. until it is abandoned in 2030. That is the plan, steered to a fiery re-entry, they describe it. But by then it will have been up there for, what, more than 3 decades. And the plan is then to replace it with privately run space stations, extraordinarily, so that NASA can focus on the moon and Mars.
Yes, and Europe will be playing a big part in that too. They intend to build an orbiting platform around the moon called the Lunar Gateway, and that is where astronauts will live and work. They will transfer to vehicles that will take them down to the lunar surface. It's so very much a transfer point. And yes, there has been a big shift in the way that money is allocated. So rather than doing these big projects through public funds, NASA has found it cheaper to get private companies to devise new ways of getting to space, doing space, and going to the moon.
I think they're explaining what is now happening, so let's have a listen.
By the recovery ship. The second fast boat is responsible for parachute recovery and also serves as a redundant boat to the first one that makes the initial approach to the Dragon spacecraft. As we saw a little bit earlier, we were also able to see one of the recovery team members get on a jet ski to help gather up the parachutes that were automatically detached from the Dragon spacecraft upon splashdown.
And it will take a little over 10 minutes for the recovery crew to complete their safety checks. Once they complete, the team will begin preparing Dragon to be lifted. And as you see, they are preparing for that to take place at this point. As part of the preparation for this lift, one member of the recovery team has climbed on top of the spacecraft already so they can attach Dragon's hoist rings and connect to the lifting lines. It will take us less than an hour to raise Dragon to the recovery boat and remove the crew from the spacecraft. After medical checkouts, the crew will return to land within 4 hours by helicopter. And if no additional medical assistance is needed, the crew will board a waiting NASA plane and depart for Houston.
So still waiting then for the Dragon capsule to be put onto what we shall now call the recovery ship. We heard the commentary there, Thomas. And then, onwards for them. But what treatment will they need? Because there must be a period of quite extreme adjustment, having been so long in anti-gravity conditions. Yes,
I mean, there'll be a psychological debrief for sure. But they will have a whole series of physical checks too, to check that the cardiovascular system is able to withstand this sudden return to gravity. Their bones and their muscles too will have weakened. The way fluid is distributed around the body,
it goes towards your head.
It does, yes, because on planet Earth, of course, walking on 2 legs, our fluid does tend to pool down in our legs. And many people do have problems with that, of course. But in space, it is redistributed. Now, as that shifts back to Earth orientation, that can cause problems. So that they may well have several days of checks in Houston before they're allowed to return to their families.
Yes, and one astronaut we spoke to earlier suggesting that the fluids rising towards your head gives a lot of pressure on the back of your eyes as well. So, all sorts of organs, your bones, your muscles, a very different sense for your organs, which will then need this period of adjustment. And presumably they've done a lot of exercise up there, don't they? I think the suggestion was 2 hours of exercise each day to combat the degradation of bones and muscles. But they have to get back into that here on Earth as well, don't they? The heaviness. We're just hearing from someone on the recovery vessel. Let's just have a listen to that.
A little of the smoke trail as the spacecraft was coming in, and then moments later we spotted those drogue chutes, and this was quickly followed by 4 healthy white and orange main parachutes. We then tracked Dragon all the way down as it slowly propelled into the ocean, and I think I speak for all of us on the ship when I say a new core memory was made today, and we are looking forward to having Crew 9 on board with us a little later.
Jaden, that is amazing. Now, obviously, we are watching it here on camera, and the landing conditions look pretty good, but how was it from your perspective? What is the sea state out there?
Absolutely. So we've had optimal conditions for splashdown, and today it is sunny and 63 degrees outside right now with clear skies, light winds, and calm seas. The sea looks absolutely beautiful right now. and light blue with the sun reflecting from it. And Kate, I think the crew's going to like what they feel weather-wise on this picture-perfect day for splashdown off the coast of Tallahassee.
Thanks so much, Jaden. It certainly looks like a beautiful day. Can you tell us a little bit about the journey of the recovery forces to get to this point?
Sure. So one unique aspect of this recovery was the onboard training on station conducted for Butch and Sunny to ensure they were ready to return on a Dragon spacecraft. That training covered all aspects of their return, including nominal and contingency departures, the orbit burn, splashdown, and post-landing ops, which is what this team is preparing for now. As for the recovery teams themselves, we started the day taking a series of helicopters out to the vessel. And as standard, the recovery director and crew support teams were on that first helicopter out and took the time to get everything prepared on the ship. About 2 hours before splashdown, they deployed those fast boats and jet skis into the water. I was actually on the second helicopter out, and we were on the vessel about an hour and a half before splashdown and landed on top of the helicopter pad on the Megan. And the teams have been working diligently across their respective disciplines this week, executing what can only be described, in my point of view, as a logistical masterpiece, just ensuring every detail has been in place for Crew 9's return.
That is such great news. I'm so glad that you're able there to experience it in person. Now, can you tell us a little bit about what's next to retrieve the crew for the recovery personnel on board?
Yeah, Kate. So coming up next, Dragon will be hoisted into the on-deck translation system, or the nest, at the aft end of the ship, and then will be translated pretty quickly towards that egress platform. We'll perform another series of safety checks as final precautionary measures just to make sure there are no hypergolic vapors present before opening that side hatch. And then once that side hatch of the spacecraft is open, the crew will be assisted out of the capsule one by one from NASA and SpaceX.
Freedom, SpaceX, ComCheck.
Freedom's got you loud and clear.
Thanks, Nick. I've got you loud and clear as well. We have completed our forward link transition.
So it looks like it is soon on the move, but we heard there it was a logistical masterclass and optimal conditions. Certainly the astronauts in there will be very relieved. The sea state is conducive to sitting in there for 25 minutes, Thomas.
Yeah, I'm not sure how your stomach is when you can't look out the window. It could have been a lot worse. But they have had a pretty hair-raising ride down. But there must be that overwhelming sense of relief that they are back on the planet safely. There is a phenomenal risk, however much we take for granted that people can get to and from space pretty routinely these days. There is always this huge risk.
Well, that was the point, wasn't it? Once you end the space shuttle programme, you have to replace it with something. And for them, there were only 3 ways down. There was the Russians, there was SpaceX, and it was supposed to be Starliner, which clearly, as you've suggested, is on the starting block. So this is the difficulty, isn't it, if you still need to move people to and from the International Space Station, with all the experiments, you know, the spacewalks that are due to take place on there, and all the missions that people still want to see.
Very much, and NASA wanted to have that backup. 2 companies, American companies, taking Americans and their allies to and from space. That was something they very much wanted, and at the moment they're completely reliant on SpaceX and Elon Musk. And at the moment, that is a rocket that is performing extremely well. But we know with its Starship, it is having big problems on its reliability. So you never know when it may have problems. And that is why they do want Boeing to find some way to get through these technical problems so that it can fly astronauts safely to and from the ISS.
And what do we know about these 2 astronauts? Both test pilots, which is why they were picked for the original mission back on June the 5th and actually steered it very carefully into docking happening at the International Space Station because they were leaking helium at the time. They lost their thrusters, did they not? But it's their job at that point to stay calm.
And they did, and you know, they did nudge it into the docking port of the International Space Station, but then as they sort of decompressed on board, got to join the crew, NASA really then had to try and resolve what those problems were, and then try and find a fix, and they couldn't. Their time was running out because they needed the SpaceX capsule to go up, because there was this routine crew changer every 6 months or so. It needed that space to dock. So ultimately, when they couldn't be sure it was safe to bring the astronauts home on board the Starliner, they had to let it go empty. And that's why Butch and Sonny ended up spending 286 days in space.
Indeed so. And why did President Trump try to speed this up? Because there was a problem too with the SpaceX capsule, which was due to go and get them. It was a new one, wasn't quite finished. They had to use an old one in the end. So there were complexities even in the rescue mission.
Butch and Sonny have been caught up in a political maelstrom. Where President Trump has talked about this being a rescue mission.
I'm told there's dolphins in the water. What an extraordinary experience for everybody involved. But anyway.
Well, yes, you can see, yes, very curious, I'm sure, by all this noise in their home patch. But yes, the political maelstrom, that President Trump described this as a rescue mission for the virtually abandoned. That's an amazing sight, isn't it? Look at them.
Inquisitive as ever.
Very strange, yes. And that was very uncomfortable for Butch and Sonny. They were very clear that they did not feel abandoned or stranded in any way. And of course, the spaceship that has brought them home was actually next to bolted onto the ISS for the last 6 months. It wasn't sent up just to rescue them.
Yes, it went up it was supposed to be for... Oh, goodness me, we're just too distracted by dolphins. Let's be honest with you.
It's quite a welcome committee, isn't it?
Yeah, it totally is. It totally is. The joy of planet Earth, Sonny and Butch, there it is, right there for you. But the spacecraft that went back up there was supposed to have 4 astronauts on. 2 of them had to be booted off, very sadly for them, to make way for these 2 coming back. So,
yeah,
you know, it's been... And waiting for the capsule all that time.
They even had to swap out the seats, because the seats are custom-made, so they had to bring in Butch and Sonny's seats so that they could ride home safely. It has to be a really snug seat, just because of the G-forces involved in the re-entry.
So what is that feeling like, then, as you begin to enter Earth's atmosphere? You're travelling 17,500 miles per hour. The idea is that you start to slow down, you begin to fall, Earth's atmosphere captures you, and then what is the sensation? Yes,
the further you fall, the greater the density of the air around you. So there's more friction, more air molecules there, and you begin to slow down quite rapidly. But the trade-off is that the heat shield begins to pick up in temperature, reaches something like 1,600 degrees Celsius, and you are surrounded by a ball of plasma, and that's simply because the air has become so hot that the electrons, let's take you back to school, the electrons have been ripped away from all the molecules in the air, and it is just a supercharged particles that you're surrounded by. It is supposed to be quite a sight, dancing colours all around the capsule. But they get through that, and then suddenly there is that jolt when the capsule is about 5-6 kilometres above the planet. When they first release the drogue chutes, the 2 small parachutes that begin to slow the capsule down still further. Then when it's about 2 kilometres above the surface, they release the 4 very large parachutes, and by the time it reaches the sea surface there, it would have been moving at just 8 miles a second. So that's quite a slowdown from 17,500 miles an hour to just 8 metres a second.
Quite an extraordinary experience for all those on board. The Dragon capsule is being pulled very slowly towards the recovery vessel. The dolphins still in the water, as curious as ever. Let's just listen in then to the final stages as the capsule is recovered.
The spacecraft up onto the recovery vessel Megan.
We just saw that hydraulic arm get lowered into the lifting position. That arm will be the mechanism that is utilized to lift Dragon up and out of the water and into the nest located there at the aft end of the recovery vessel.
And the recovery vessel being used today is, as we mentioned multiple times, is named Megan, but that's actually after NASA astronaut Megan McArthur, who flew on Crew 2 a couple of years ago. We're getting some views now from actually inside the boat.
Yeah, you're exactly right. This view is straight down the recovery vessel. That platform that was closest to the camera, that is the Egress platform.
Freedom. Rigging is almost complete. Approximately 5 minutes until capsule lift.
Great news there from SpaceX Core. So about 5 minutes left until we see Dragon Freedom get lifted out of the water. That hydraulic arm, as I said before, is the mechanism that will lift it. It's quite swift, actually, the whole process of getting the spacecraft.
Brace for capsule lift.
Bracing.
There it goes, Dragon Freedom being lifted out of the water and onto our recovery vessel, Megan.
So once securely on...
Welcome aboard the recovery vessel. Recovery personnel are completing final checks and stand by for translation to the Egress platform.
Freedom copies.
Great news there, letting us know that Dragon Freedom has been successfully recovered from the water's surface. If you've just joined us, we had an on-time splashdown at 5:57 p.m. Eastern Time, and we can now see that the water recovery operations are continuing to progress. The nest where the Dragon spacecraft is located is going to get moved forward. This will happen after one of the recovery crew members does some checks, and we'll also see some hosing. Obviously, the spacecraft splashed down in salt water. Salt water is corrosive, and we want to try and rinse out as much of the salt water as possible to reduce that corrosion on the metallic structures. So we can see some guidance there being provided, really steering the spacecraft properly into the Dragon's nest.
And it's been 30 minutes.
So, Thomas, we're clearly waiting to see the astronauts. You're suggesting they're helped out of the capsule on the deck, you know, in a modern spacesuit, presumably. And, you know, all parts of space travel are changing fast, aren't they?
Yeah, the SpaceX spacesuits are nothing like the ones that we got used to with NASA. They're much sleeker. They look like Star Troopers, don't they? No weapons, glad to say. But they will be a little bit weak after so long in space, even though they do their best to do a bit of physical training while they're up there. There is nothing like gravity and certainly balance, of course. They won't really have had to balance while they've been up there, and all that takes a while to get used to once again.
And we were speaking to a former astronaut who flew on 4 space shuttle missions and explaining that every re-entry has risks to it. There'll be a huge amount of relief after what they have been through, that this part of their 17-hour journey today, their 9-month adventures in space, was so successful.
Yes, I mean, the SpaceX track record, safety record, is extremely good, but there is always that element of risk, and we know that from shuttle, that sadly sometimes things can go horribly wrong, and sometimes for reasons that could have been planned for, and that's why they're very cautious. That's why Butch and Sonny didn't come back on the Boeing Starliner. They weren't 100% sure that it was safe for them to do so when they couldn't identify the problem or a fix, and that's why NASA sent it back empty. That is why SpaceX was given the job of bringing them home. I'm sure that would have gone down very well in the boardroom of SpaceX.
And this will be comfortable for them, won't they, as they're lifted and put back on the platform, swinging around in a capsule, desperate to see daylight, no doubt.
And take that first breath of earthly air for 9 months. There's nothing sweeter. And of course, maybe the dolphins will hang around too. There'll be some greeting.
Well, indeed, how do they breathe on the International Space Station? You know, what do they eat? What has life been like for them?
Well, everything is very carefully filtered. The water, the air is all used and reused. The food, extra supplies were sent up, extra clothing for Butch and Sunny, so that they were able to stay much longer than had been expected, because, of course, they would have taken just a small suitcase and they needed a bit more. But the International Space Station is pretty well kitted out, and it does have emergency supplies for situations like this. But nevertheless, that everything was done to make sure that they were comfortable.
And Butch, I think, is 62 and Sunny 59. Is that it, do you think, for them in space? Is it their last missions?
You'd never say never. I mean, they may well return to test pilot the next attempt with the Starliner. Let's face it, they have the experience now. And they did say that, you know, the Starliner did handle very well. They were very pleased with it. But until that last moment when the thrusters gave up and there was that helium leak that really was its demise.
Absolutely. As you say, the launch at that time, back on June the 5th last year from Cape Canaveral, went well. The orbit was safely achieved. All went well, except the next day, as they were going to dock with the International Space Station as planned, their thrusters started to fail. They were leaking helium. There had been some helium leaks prior to liftoff. So that was the concern. It is 10:30, by the way. What we're waiting to do is see the astronauts, 4 of them, in fact, in this Dragon capsule, SpaceX capsule, who will disembark after a 17-hour journey from the International Space Station, which began very early UK time this morning. And so both of them test pilots trying to do this docking back on June the 5th, temporarily had to take control to get the thrusters back, something that would normally be a fully automated docking, presumably, to the ISS.
Yes, and it is remarkable that the computers can control it, because it is very small bursts from the thrusters that are used to orientate the space capsule. It needs to be pretty much bang on for the space capsule to dock with the ISS. So they don't want anything that could ram it into what is a very expensive and reasonably fragile structure that is the space station.
And clearly heat shield, which protects the capsule on re-entry, is an absolutely critical part of space travel. We saw it go catastrophically wrong with the tiles on the space shuttle, which was one of those elements that ended that extraordinary programme. Has that also developed in technology through the years?
So they do work on the tiles to make sure that it is as good as it can. For example, with the Starship, the new mega rocket that SpaceX is developing, they are upgrading those heat shields all the time, because they want to reuse both the upper and the lower stage of that rocket. That is why space is becoming so much cheaper, that these things that you see here, once they're back on Earth, they are cleaned up, given the once over, and off they go again.
And with all the high tech, they've just pulled out a ladder to get them off. It's on the, you probably can't quite see it, but it's on the left of your screen there. You know, for the 2 other astronauts in there, one from NASA, one a Russian as well, you know, coming back to this kind of celebrity moment must be an extraordinary moment for them as well.
Yes, Nick Hague, the commander, has appeared in news conferences from on board the ISS with Butch and Sunny, but the Russian has kind of been overlooked.
Alexander Gubanov.
We shouldn't forget that the space station has been this incredible place where nations have cooperated, they have collaborated. Despite all the geopolitics on Earth, they have worked shoulder to shoulder for long periods, and it's been an enormous success. And yet it is really American domestic politics that have bumped rather sharply into this mission, with President Trump trying to own the narrative over Butch and Sonny, and they have pushed back, but it has been uncomfortable for them.
Yes, and on the day that a phone call takes place between Presidents Trump and Putin, a Russian astronaut bumps shoulders with 3 NASA astronauts and lands in America.
Yes, and it hasn't always been like that. I mean, there's one reason that the Americans no longer take off on the Soyuz rocket, as Tim Peake did. They very much wanted their own route to space, just for security reasons, if nothing else. So that's why they did award these contracts to SpaceX and to Boeing. SpaceX have done it incredibly well, much cheaper than NASA could ever have dreamt of doing, and yet Boeing is still struggling. You can see them just beginning to hose the capsule down there. They want to get as much salt water off because, again, the salt water can be corrosive on the metal. They want to preserve it as best possible so they can turn it around and use it again.
So despite the charred appearance of it, it's reusable, is it?
Yeah, they'll polish it up.
Polish it up, one hopes so. Certainly while other astronauts have logged longer space flights over the decades, none had so much to deal with, so much uncertainty, or seen the length of their mission extend so dramatically as well. But, you know, the moment is soon upon us where these 2 astronauts will be welcomed, not quite onto land, but onto the recovery ship. And, you know, when they look back, I guess they will think they were blessed to be in space for so long. Let's listen in.
The team did an awesome job, both uphill and downhill. Just really impressed. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. It's been an honor.
This is a pretty exciting moment coming up. We are working to open the side hatch. One thing that may not be obvious from, you know, just looking at the spacecraft here is that this side hatch that we're about to open, the last time it was open was when this spacecraft was at the launch pad. This side hatch is what is used for initial capsule ingress and final capsule egress, but all comings and goings from the spacecraft while it is on board the space station are from the forward hatch, which is located at the top of the spacecraft under that nose cone. So this is a pretty exciting moment because it will be the crew's first breath of fresh air since boarding their ships at the start of their journeys last year.
And the very first person that will have the opportunity to say hello to the crew once that hatch is open is a SpaceX medical recovery personnel representative. Then we'll see procedures take place to remove the footrests of Dragon. That will just help the recovery personnel get a little bit more room to access the crew and help get them out of the spacecraft.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Safety is, once again, top priority here, and removing those footrests from all 4 seats will be helpful as a recovery, as a SpaceX recovery team member will actually go into the capsule, into Dragon Freedom to help the crew members unbuckle and stand up, and essentially we'll also see a fun little slide be put in place to help the crew members exit the spacecraft safely. So yeah, we're going to remove all 4 of those footrests to basically give a little bit more working room inside the spacecraft.
That's right. And we did hear the go for that hatch opening, so we're just a couple minutes away from being able to see that. And then we might be able to get the chance to see a couple of views inside of the Dragon and see the crew following their splashdown.
Now, opening that side hatch isn't quite like opening, the door to your car. We have to depress the seal around the side hatch, as well as, we'll now see them open that side hatch up.
And there you have it. The side hatch is open for the first time since September.
We can see some of the protective equipment there that was brought into frame that will help protect the edge of the side hatch. One, from any potential damage. Oh, we can see the recovery crew member there taking photos of the side hatch seal. This is part of the standard operation for recovery. These photos will get saved into our procedure. We'll then install that protective frame around the side hatch. This helps to ensure that the side hatch itself, the edges of it, incur no damage while crew members are coming out from the spacecraft. If you missed it, there was also a recovery team member that went inside. So there are now 5 people on board the Dragon spacecraft.
And if you are just joining us, it has not yet even been an hour since Crew 9 splashed down off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time. The crew is now on board the recovery vessel Megan, and the hatch is open. The next major milestone that we'll see is when the crew will actually egress or exit the spacecraft. But before that, they'll continue to, the recovery personnel rather, will continue to install that protective area around the hatch and then remove the footrests. So we're a couple minutes away from seeing the crew egress, but not too long away.
And the first fresh air Thomas for Sonny Williams and Butch Wilmore since June the 5th last year.
Incredible, isn't it? Yeah, and they're not having to breathe somebody else's air, which has been carefully filtered. This is their own fresh air that they're breathing. That's sea air, the salty air. I'm sure it smells really sweet.
And 2 priorities. 1, we heard, removing footrests to help them get out. And secondly, medical personnel going in to check that all is OK after this truly dramatic re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. Temperatures up to 1,600 degrees, G-forces as well, about 4 times the Earth's gravity.
There they are.
There we are, away from them. So we're still inside.
Sonny on the right-hand side there. I didn't quite see which one was Butch. I think he's second left. But all happy, clearly.
Generally speaking, we have the individuals in the 2 center seats of the spacecraft exit first. You might hear us refer to this as the exit process as egress. It's just another term for exiting the spacecraft. Generally speaking, we most of the time have the 2 center seats egress first, as it makes moving around inside the capsule a little bit easier. We can see the tablets that were previously located on the upper leg of the crew members. We can see those being handed out to the recovery team. Those were taken off prior to the entry phase, to spacecraft reentry. Those had to be stored and secured prior to dynamic operations.
It looks like we are starting to see the footrests also be removed. I just saw one there on the screen. There are 4, of course, 1 for each crew member.
Those footrests are made out of carbon fiber and are actually sized appropriately for each crew member, as everybody has different measurements and different leg lengths. Same goes for the armrests and the bucket length of each seat. We size those appropriately for the crew members and to ensure their comfort and safety. I believe we just saw the little ramp that is used to help slide the crew members out from inside the spacecraft.
And once the crew does exit Dragon Freedom, they will be placed on to a stretcher to go to a medical bay for medical checkouts. This is standard procedure for all Dragon spacecraft flights that splashdown crewed, as well as for our Soyuz spacecraft that land in Kazakhstan.
We could see the exterior of Dragon Freedom quite clearly in this shot, and it's such a beautiful sight. I personally prefer the capsule when it has some of that charring from atmospheric reentry. It is the signature sign of a capsule that has returned to Earth.
I mean, it's amazing you survived the charring of atmospheric re-entry at all, isn't it, Thomas? It's still mind-blowing that we're getting people up and down through Earth's atmosphere, out of our gravity, living in space conditions and then returning them to Earth safely. I know it's been happening since the 60s, but nonetheless, it is still extraordinary.
Yes, and the next stage is going to be more extraordinary still when people are landing on the moon and again in a second phase and living there, and that will become much more common. You'll see many more people going up and down.
And the moment, obviously, when the blackout ended, we began to hear from them again, and we saw those enormous parachutes start to deploy. Those are two little drone ones to start with, I think you called them, then 4 massive parachutes to start to slow the capsule to the point where it could hit the sea safely, Thomas.
Yeah, drogue parachutes to slow it enough before they can get the main ones up safely. And it does, by then you're looking at a few hundred miles an hour when those parachutes are deployed. But they do slow them down to just 8 meters a second by the time of splashdown. And you did see that it was very gentle splashdown, helped, of course, by very calm sea conditions off the coast of Florida near Tallahassee.
And it looks like a ramp has gone in, the 2 astronauts in the middle seats being removed first. Hard for us to make them out. You think possibly one of them is Butch. And then put on a medical structure, they said. I don't know if that's some sort of gurney, to take them to a medical bay. So clearly, there is concern about the impact of re-entry into, Earth's gravity for people.
They'll be giddy.
Giddy, and the balance goes, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. They haven't had to have the fluid.
Here we go,
in the
first
ear.
one's out. Let's listen in.
We can see folks on board clapping as our first crew member.
And that is NASA astronaut Nick Hague, commander of Crew 9, now out of Crew Dragon Freedom. Some smiles, thumbs up, and a wave. Can't get any better than that.
Yeah, that is one happy camper, that's for sure. As we said before, it is standard procedure for all of our long-duration crew members to receive assistance upon egressing from the spacecraft. We basically help them move off of the recovery deck and into the private medical quarters for their initial consultation with the SpaceX flight surgeon. So we'll see that take place for all 4 of our crew members today.
And we are standing by for the next crew member to exit Freedom. Next up out of the capsule, we expect Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov. His first space flight. Spent 171 days in space alongside NASA astronaut Nick Hague.
Looks like we're getting some cheers and clapping on board as Alexander is slid down the little ramp and placed into the mobility aid. Once again, big smile.
Yes, a big smile there from Russia's Alexander Gubanov. NASA's Nick Hague also out, leaving the two longest to last then, Thomas.
Yeah,
the two really the world has watched and waited for, Sunny Williams and Butch Wilmore. An epic adventure in space, 9 months from 8 days, soon to be re-emerging and breathing that first fresh air for, I think you said it was 286 days at their time in space.
121 million miles they've travelled on their little space odyssey, and this is the last bit of that extraordinary journey that we're witnessing now.
As I said before, we generally try to have the crew members that are located in the two center seats aboard Dragon, and we like to have them egress first if possible, as it creates a little bit more movable working room inside the spacecraft. There is a recovery crew member inside that is helping all of our Crew 9 crew egress or exit from the spacecraft.
We are standing by for the next crew member to egress or exit Crew Dragon Freedom following the splashdown not even an hour ago at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time. Really have the recovery operations down pretty quick at this point.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible to think that, just 5 years ago when we were doing the initial demonstration missions of the Dragon for Crew Dragon, that now we're under about 30 minutes for, to retrieve the spacecraft from the water, and just several minutes here while it's been on board and to get everyone, really to get that side hatch open. For those of you that have just recently joined, the Dragon had an on-time splashdown. It looks like we're getting our next crew member here. That is none other than Sunny Williams. Big smile, big waves. She, like her other crew members, now will be assisted onto the mobility aid.
There we have it, some waves, some thumbs up, and some smiles.
Definitely seems to be a theme among all recovery operations.
Absolutely. And of course, that leaves NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore inside Dragon in seat 4. We're getting some views of him now as he egresses or exits the spacecraft.
Once again, some elation and cheers there from Butch Wilmore. As we mentioned before, returning to Earth coming from a microgravity environment can wreak havoc on the body. So it is customary and just standard procedure for all of our long-term space residents to get assistance once they are back on board the recovery vessel.
So, Sunny Williams and Butch Wilmore, you are home. Welcome back to Planet Earth. Big smiles, Thomas, big waves. Such relief for them after what has turned out to be a most extraordinary adventure in space.
Yes, it was supposed to be 8 days. It lasted 9 months. The stranded astronauts are home, brought back by the capsule called Freedom. A big moment for them, a big moment for SpaceX too.
Yep, return to Earth in freedom and now free to breathe, you know, air for the first time since June the 5th. A mission, a test flight that effectively went wrong because they were left up there because helium was leaking, the thrusters were broken. It was felt by NASA not safe to bring them home after 8 days.
And so that Boeing capsule was sent back empty. The 2 astronauts left on the International Space Station to join the rest of the crew. Sunny took part in 2 spacewalks herself, and now they have been brought back by SpaceX. This is something that they do plan for, but nevertheless, these 2 astronauts will be relieved that they were back on Earth. After a few days of medical checks back in Houston, they'll be able to join their families. And I know that Sunny's looking to take part in wild swims and walk the dogs. That's something that she's missed.
And she was met by dolphins in the ocean off the coast of Tallahassee in Florida. And over 62 hours of spacewalking, Sunny Williams became a record breaker in space. She said it was her happy place. No doubt she's also delighted, along with Butch, to be back home. Thomas, it's been wonderful to watch it. The dolphins were the icing on the cake. I thank you.